Congratulations on the new season of the project Talk for More. Did you miss any important news? Were you able to figure out this chaos of information on your own? Oh, I understand you. Don't worry, we have Henry Keane for that. He never misses anything, notes everything, and reports it to you.
Elect or not to elect? If I'm getting a Russian passport on the occupied territories of Ukraine under the barrel of the Russian gun, does that make me Russian enough? What is Kremlin expecting from these all faked and staged elections? New citizens, or maybe some dead Chekhovian souls? Elections under the barrel of machine gun and threats. Russia is trying to mold the Kremlin's influence in the occupied territories of Ukraine by staging pseudo-elections there. They will be held simultaneously with the elections on the territory of Russia. According to old Russian tradition, the results of the election should be known even before the will of the people is revealed. Like even before the elections, it was known that the ruling political party of the Russian Federation, United Russia, won a majority of votes in the 4 occupied regions of Ukraine. According to the Center of National Resistance, the Russian occupiers significantly inflated the number of voters on the lists. So this inflated elective vote started its journey into the well-known future on September the 3rd, even before the official announcement of elections. In many communities, machine gunners came to people directly to homes and their houses with helping hand, so-called elections commissions. Serhiy Danilov, Deputy Director of the Center of Middle Eastern Studies, told us about it on the air of Chromatsky Radio. According to him, the occupiers went directly to the homes of elderly people and tried to persuade, or rather said intimidate them to stay or to say a few words on camera after they actually vote. Beforehand, the occupiers forced Ukrainians to accept Russian passports and citizenship, conducting the so-called passportization, thus forcing people to waive Ukrainian citizenship. And even so, on September the 1st, Russian occupation authorities were still unable to satisfy the Kremlin's demand, which is 80% of the occupied territory's citizens must have a Russian passport. Therefore, people with Ukrainian passports, and moreover, just Ukrainian-style driving licenses, and the holders of these documents were included in the so-called electoral lists. As the director of the NGO Eastern Human Rights Group, Vera Yastribova, noted, more than 9,000 candidates and more than 21,000 commission members were registered at the staged elections, with more than half of these people being Russians and local collaborators. The defense forces of Ukraine urged Ukrainians to ignore the elections in the occupied territories. They used the unmanned aerial vehicle to send a message, to deploy leaflets that are saying that Ukrainian citizens should not be taking any part in this fake show. Serhiy Leshchenko, the advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, is with us today to provide us with some answer. Serhiy, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Perfectly well, if you can say, in these conditions and what is happening in the world. Serhiy, my first question, well, obviously, the elections will not be legit in any way, and the whole world knows it. Why, then, is this stage the absurd? What is Putin expecting of all that, do you think?
It's the way to legitimize occupation in the eyes of his local audience, the first area of his propaganda, and second, to deal with the audience in the countries which are sympathetic to Putin or kind of a neutral, fake neutral countries, let's say this way, because it's impossible to be neutral when it's a war going on in Europe. So it's a society of countries in Africa, in Latin America, which in the idea of Putin will, let's say, one more time be with the idea that everything has happened, occupation has happened, elections after this happened, so let's go forward, let's forget about everything what happened, and let's accept the new reality when this territory is now part of Russia. This is the way how Putin would like to deal with societies of these countries and, of course, with his local audience which always looking for the proof that he's a powerful leader who made what he promised and integrated these occupied territories into Russia.
So do you think that he would be able to do that this time?
It will be difficult because the war is ongoing, and any elections on the territories which can be attacked and shelled, it's not a legitimate election because it's not an election in normal circumstances. Plus, there is no international observers, there is no media coverage, there is no opportunity for plurality of political views on this election. So this is only the fake way to legitimize occupation. But, you know, when you keep the rules of your propaganda machine in your hands, like Putin does, it will be another topic for him to deal with public opinion in the countries I mentioned and inside Russia.
Well, I believe the Russian nation, or rather say the population, will just forgive him about anything. I mean, so they probably are okay with that. But do you believe the sanction is the proper tool? Do you think the sanctions are working? We actually can't, we as a collective West can't do anything about it, but sanctioning the persons, the individuals who take part in this on the side of Russia. Is that, it is legit, we can do it, but do you think this is working? I mean, the sanctions?
In wider sense, of course, not sanctions working good, but if it's personal sanctions, I believe all this propaganda is not happy to be banned for traveling abroad, to have all money, transactions in dollars to be banned, to have no money from abroad. It's not the way how they would like to spend the rest of their life. So maybe not today, but in a few weeks, months, or years, they would feel the pressure of the sanctions, for sure.
Amen to that. Putin, he's the one who can change everything there. He's the owner of the country. But the nation should be responsible for that because they gave him the key to the castle for 25 years of anything. He's absolute Tsar. And it's okay for the domestic population of Russia to accept even these so-called elections.
We cannot deal with public opinion in Russia, frankly speaking, because it's a country living under dictatorship, and it's a country where our voice is not heard well. That is why we can just deal with public opinion abroad to explain global population that these fake elections has no sense and only political legitimization of occupation. But in general, of course, what's going on in Russia, it's crimes and crimes against local citizens as well by dictator taking or seized or catched power many, many years ago. But we can only can do just to show Russians that in their interest is to stop this dictatorship, the seizure of power, because they will pay higher and higher price every year while Putin in power, to increase sanctions, to increase pressure on political and military organization of Russia, to propagandists and to all population. All Russians have to feel this pressure, as it happened in Soviet Union when global democratic community increased sanctions against Soviet Union after invading into Afghanistan.
Okay. Say Putin dies tomorrow. Do you believe that anything will change in Russia?
I think a lot of things will be changed, of course. Not immediately, but it will take some transformation period. As it happened after the death of Brezhnev, it took two more general secretaries, but both of them were almost done. And after this, perestroika started. So in the case of Putin's death, I believe it's going to be like transitional government for a few weeks, years, months, I don't know. And then there is a good chance to reestablish Russia as a country which can be viewed as a successor of Russian dictatorship, able to pay and necessary to pay all compensation to Ukraine, but then taking another path of development. I believe they one day will try to join democratic path of development, but not immediately. It will be difficult because when you spend 25 years in concentration camp of Putin's dictatorship, you cannot be immediately democratic after he loses the power or died.
I absolutely agree with you on that. My last question goes to you as a person, as an individual. Do you think that Russian nation, after Putin in some way goes, I don't know, 6 feet under or just goes, would love to have another Tsar?
It depends on how Putin leaves the power, as Stalin, or as Brezhnev, or as Khrushchev. I don't know, different models. But their willingness depends on their social standards. If they're gonna live poor and poor, if they pay higher and higher price, their willingness to have Tsar will be less and less. This is my answer.
Thank you very much for your time and for your expertise and for what you do. Hope you have us sometime soon back with more questions to talk for more.
Yep.
Let me address my next question to someone who is not someone, actually. He's something. And artificial intelligence will help me to answer the question. And the question is, what happens to the country and the government that manipulates and falsificates the elections?
Electoral fraud erodes public trust in the democratic process. When citizens believe that their votes do not count or that the electoral system is rigged, they may lose faith in their government's legitimacy. Fraud can trigger political instability, protests, and even violence, further challenging a government's legitimacy. This instability can disrupt the functioning of state institutions and the rule of law. The effects of electoral fraud and manipulation can have long-term consequences, impacting a country's political culture and the way citizens perceive democracy.
The answer was absolutely brilliant, don't you think? What I want to ask is the same question to a living person, to our next guest. Our guest today is Peter Stano, spokesperson of the European Union on Foreign Policy. Hello, Peter.
Hello, good afternoon from Brussels.
Hello. My question is, well, first of all, thank you for your time to joining our broadcast, but these elections on the occupied territories, I just love the sound of this phrase, the elections on the occupied territories, which is absurd. But of course they are illegitimate. You have already condemned them. So my question, what else can the European Union do about it so as to make it clear to the whole world it is a crime and shame and a fake show?
Well, first of all, these are not elections. These are so-called elections. This is totally illegitimate. This is a sham vote that is organized by the occupiers on the territory of another country. So, of course, this cannot be recognized. This cannot be even taken seriously. But the problem is that they are taking place, especially on the Ukrainian territories, under the atmosphere of occupation, intimidation of the local population. So this, I think, they can be seen for what they really are, just a sham vote organized by the occupier in pure violation of the international law, in yet another violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And it's for the whole world to see how illegitimate and illegal the behavior of Russia is when it comes to handling things on the Ukrainian territories.
Will there be personal responsibility for the organizers of these sham elections, such as, I don't know, personal sanctions maybe, or maybe some other responsibility?
Well, of course, every violation of the international law needs to be punished. There needs to be accountability. And the European Union has always said, especially when it comes to Ukraine, every violation of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine is answered by certain actions by the European Union. Most often, these are, and these have been also in the past, also when we had the so-called referenda in the Donetsk and Luhansk separatist territories, we sanctioned those people who were responsible for executing these decisions or these votes or these actions, and all those who were involved in it, including those, for example, I mean, in cases of Donetsk and Luhansk, those members of the Russian parliament who voted for recognition of this, or for the recognition of the annexation, or for all the acts which were linked to the gross violation and disregard for Ukraine's sovereignty. So, of course, I mean, after every such vote, or so-called vote and sham fake vote on the Ukrainian territory, the European Union takes action and sanctions those responsible.
European Union takes actions, and that means sanctions. Forgive me my poetry, but maybe something else is needed. maybe sanctions maybe is just the one and the last thing that EU can do, the crime and the punishment. So the punishment, the sanctions, is that all? Can we do something else about it? Because this is outrageous, isn't it?
Absolutely, and sanctions are never just the only answer by the European Union. Sanctions are always just one of the instruments we are using. Another instrument is the public and international condemnation of these illegal actions. We are calling out Russia on the international scene and pointing out to Russia at every available opportunity in every international forum. Look, this is yet another example of the illegal behavior, of the disregard for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, but also disregard for the international law, disregard for the UN Charter. So these are just two of the measures we are taking, or two instruments we are using. But of course, I mean, one very important one is to help Ukraine to change the situation on the ground, to push out the aggressor, to push him away from the Ukrainian territories and reinstate the authority of the Ukrainian state on these territories. So there are multiple measures, there are multiple instruments we are using, and we will keep using them until Ukraine wins in this struggle for its independence and sovereignty.
These so-called elections are part of Putin's propaganda campaign, live-done propaganda campaign, no doubt about that. So should EU be talking more about it or less? What I mean is, aren't we flattering Putin by even discussing the whole thing on a global level, or we should be talking more about it?
I'm afraid this is not only propaganda, this is actually creating facts on the ground. This is what Putin wants, and this is what he started already back in 2014 when he invaded Ukraine for the first time in the East, and in Crimea, of course. But in the East, I mean, he just tries to carve out territory by territory by territory, claiming there are Russian citizens and we need to protect them. This is the twisted doctrine that he has been following at the latest since 2014. So it's not only propaganda, unfortunately. So we need to take this seriously, and we need to call out Russia for these violations, exactly for the whole world to see the illegality and the inhuman behavior by the Kremlin regime against Ukraine. This is unheard of. A civilized country cannot simply invade another country, grab away the territories, and then just organize elections there and impose their own state administration there, just as if the territory would belong to this country. This is not how international relations work in 21st century. Unfortunately, Putin doesn't get it, and he continues acting in the way that resembles more 19th century of imperialistic actions. Yeah, but this is not what the world should tolerate.
Thank you very much for your detailed answer. The thing is, I would love to, I'm not loving it, but I would have to disagree with you partially. Because if you want to find the alternative source of information, you will be able to find it. If you don't want it and you prefer to hide in the corner, or just, switch off your monitor and say that we have Putin and he will decide for us, then that is what is happening. Because it is a hard choice for Russian people now, that I must admit, because they actually are cornered to see at some point, they would have to see that they are the impersonation of the new modern fascism, the Russism. And this is a hell of a choice to understand that you are a fascist. Oh, pardon me. I would rather say that someone else is responsible for that. I don't know, Ukraine, aliens, whoever. But yes, this is a process. And yes, this is a long process. So, and thank you very much for your position and for what you do. Yeah, and I got one more question. That ocean on your back, why is it smiling? Take a look at your map.
Well, well, I'm speaking to you from my office, and in the end, I mean, we have to take the world from the positive side, because otherwise there are so many negative things and developments that if we dwell on them too much, it would just lead to one constant depression. So this is a reminder that whatever we are dealing with, we cannot forget how to smile and find pleasures and positive things in the smallest, in the simplest everyday things of our lives that can help us get through all the hardship we are either living in, or like the Ukrainians, or working with, like in case of us here in the European Commission.
I'll take that as a habit. Thank you very much for you and European Commission for the job that you are doing and for your time and experience with us. Thank you very much, Peter. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you and good luck.
Good luck. Goodbye. My next question to the collective wisdom of all humanity, to the artificial intelligence. How artificial intelligence thinks the dictatorial regimes are using illegitimate elections to maintain their power?
Authoritarian leaders use force and intimidation to suppress dissent. They may arrest opposition figures or intimidate voters to discourage opposition participation. Regimes modify electoral boundaries to favor their supporters, thereby manipulating representation in their favor. Authoritarian leaders use elections to legitimize their rule, portraying themselves as democratically elected leaders, even if the elections are deeply flawed or illegal.
Well, the answer was clear, and it is also quite clear and obvious what and who we're talking about, right? But I want to highlight another issue in this regard, the issue of candidates. Russian parliament members, deputies, military and collaborators. In a ballot list, you will see now the main parts of the list are the participants of the so-called military operation. In their campaign videos, the candidates brag of their alleged military achievements, how they occupied Ukrainian cities and communities, and about their bravery during their participation in special operations. Let's just watch.
I am a member of a special military operation. In February, I was one of the first to support Putin's decision on the SVO. We do not abandon ours.
Right. Amongst the candidates of these representative bodies of Russia on occupied Ukrainian territories are the, guess who? Russian military who participated in the invasion of Ukraine, killed and tortured people, said the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Verkhovna Rada Dmitro Lubinets. He added that the voting as such takes place under the barrels of machine guns. Let us talk about the matter with our next guest. He's already waiting on the line for us. Our guest, Cormak Smith, ex-advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, is on the line. Welcome back, Mr. Smith, sir.
Henry, lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you again, indeed. I've been recently asking myself and my guests this. What do you think Putin could be expecting from the staged elections, the so-called elections? Surely, if internationally everyone knows it is a fake, and domestically, internally within Russia, no one even knows about the international reactions, since all the alternative to Kremlin's media sources has been just shut and cut. So what is the reason for all this?
Well, look, nobody apart from Mr. Putin knows what goes on in that head of his. But clearly, any elections in the 4 oblasts that have been that Russia has claimed to annex, and of course they don't control all of any of the 4 oblasts that they have claimed to annex. Any elections in those oblasts would be completely illegitimate. And, you know, as an example, in 2014, when Russia illegally annexed Crimea, they immediately held elections where, I don't know, something in the high 90s of people supposedly said they wanted to be in Russia. Now, we know that those elections were not properly run. We know that nobody in the international community recognizes them. So any elections that would be held in these 4 oblasts would have absolutely no value whatsoever to Ukraine or to the international community. They would be meaningless. What Putin hopes to achieve from that is anybody's guess, but they would be completely illegitimate and meaningless.
Well, my guess, personally, is that this is all a stage show for internal domestic audience who just doesn't care.
Well, I agree. And, you know, every time we look at polls from Levada, which is probably the
Right.
most respected of the polls. Unfortunately, these polls show that the majority of the Russian people still support Putin and still support, his genocidal war on Ukraine. And we know that the Russian people are fed a constant diet of lies and genocidal rhetoric every night on state-controlled television. So this has got to have something to do with it. But I think we must also say we cannot deny the Russian people responsibility for this either, because they must be able to have access to information which tells them what is going on. So I'm afraid that this is more evidence. This is not just Putin's war. This is Russia's war. And this is a war which is unfortunately supported by the overwhelming majority of the Russian people. And that's very sad, but that seems to be how it is. And that's what all the evidence has told us from the very beginning of this further invasion in February 2022.
So are you saying, Cormac, Putin dies tomorrow, nothing changes in Russia's foreign policy? Do you foresee any possible changes in Russian foreign policy if Putin dies tomorrow, hopefully?
I'm afraid, Henry, I'm not optimistic. My education in this began back in 2014 when I started to get invited out to former communist states, both former Soviet republics, but also former states from behind the Iron Curtain, and also in the Balkans, the former Yugoslavia. And at these meetings where I was invited, to speak on government communications, and I spoke in about 10 different countries, I met lots and lots of very, very interesting senior people from different countries. And I well remember one conversation I had with it was a member of Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats at the time, who was in Bosnia and Herzegovina at the same time as me, but doing some different capacity building work. And I can well remember a conversation that I had with this gentleman and another person saying, if Putin were to go, that there are most likely worse behind him in the Kremlin. So everything we have seen from the recent so-called attempted coup by Prigozhin and the other people that we know to be around, I think I would not be optimistic that if Putin were to disappear tomorrow, if anything would change. This is clearly Russia's war, and it has been driven by a kleptocratic regime in the Kremlin that has been based on nothing but mafia and KGB principles. So I think the message is, unfortunately, nothing would change. And there are those people who are speculating at the moment that Putin may indeed already be dead, and there's people that speculate about body doubles and so forth. We simply don't know the truth. But no, I don't think anything would necessarily change.
There is one thing that actually matters. There is such an information that Serbia gives passports to Russian citizens on a massive scale. What is this? If this is true, why and what for?
Well, there has long, and certainly going back to 2014, which I've already said was where my education in what I refer to as the Eastern neighborhood and Russia's malign influence there began. There have been very, very concerning relations between Russia and Serbia. And we unfortunately, Serbia is not in NATO, but Serbia is a worry along with some other countries like Hungary at the moment. So I would be very, very concerned about this because it's the enemy within.
Serbia and Hungary, how big is this enemy, you think, in terms of, let's say, European Union?
Well, obviously Hungary is a member of both the European Union and NATO. And as far back as 2017, 2018, I was working closely with the Minister for Education and Science in Ukraine, where Hungary was causing a lot of problems because of some tensions with ethnic Hungarians inside Ukraine, and they were causing a lot of tensions and trouble for Ukraine because Ukraine was looking to, if you like, to elevate the status of the Ukrainian language, which is a natural thing for any nation state to do. So, you know, Hungary has long been, and because of the way the EU works and NATO works, unfortunately, Hungary is in a position to frustrate a lot of what those two bodies would want to do to support Ukraine. So again, Hungary is a problem.
Can we deal with this problem somehow? What can you suggest? Just to take a closer look, to wait? Are there any tools? Are there any instruments? What can we do about it at this point?
Personally, and it's a very personal view, I would like to see Hungary ejected from both the EU and NATO. But I don't, I'm not aware of certainly I'm not aware of an easy mechanism for that to be done. And, you know, in a way, Putin uses our democracy against us. And, you know, the one thing that we know about Putin and Putin's Russia is that they are absolutely opposed and hell-bent on destroying our international rules-based order, which may not be perfect, but it's been responsible for the greatest period of peace and prosperity that the world has ever known since 1945, when we came out of the ashes of the Second World War. Now, there is ample evidence, you know, going back, I always like to quote Serhiy Lavrov at the Munich Security Conference in 2017, who in a speech talked about the coming asunder of the old order, the rules-based international order, and talked about the rise of the post-West era. And I've written many articles and I've spoken many times recently about this. That would be a post-West era led by Russia, likely as a junior partner to China. We know that North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Belarus are already in Russia's pocket. And we have a lot of concerns about some very, very big countries in the BRICS in particular, Brazil, South Africa, and India, who are at best can be described to be on the fence with this conflict, and if anything, leaning in Russia's direction. So I think this tells us that, you know, I've always said, for people like myself and you, Henry, the moral reason for supporting Ukraine is more than enough. Genocide is being committed in a European country for the last 18 months in 2023. But even if you're one of those people who don't care, this is a wolf that will come to our door. Because if we don't stop Putin definitively in Ukraine and defeat Russia, and a lot in the West seem to have a problem with talking about ultimate defeat of Russia. But if Russia is not defeated, it's our very rules-based order in the longer term which will be under huge threat. And my feeling is China, who are playing a long game and are sitting on the fence and are certainly, while they might seem sympathetic to Russia, they are certainly not playing out what would be expected from what I think they call their no limits partnership or their no limits friendship. So China is being cautious at the moment, but it's only absolute strength and determination from the West in supporting Ukraine and making sure that Ukraine will win that will ultimately, I believe, secure our way of life going forward. And I honestly believe that it's our way of life wrapped up in the rules-based order that is very much at threat here. There is more at stake in Ukraine than Ukraine.
Thank you very much for your very detailed answer, as always. Secretary General of the United States, when you were last time in Ukraine, started the process. Well, I hope that this is the start of a process, that the frozen assets of the Russian dictatorship can finally be released in favor of Ukraine. Do you think that this is the start of it? Do you think that this is the start of that process and Ukraine can be gaining of that very soon?
I sincerely hope that it is. There are 2 points here. The great Bill Browder said, you know, way back at the start of this war, that the way to get to Putin was to follow the money. And the fact that, you know, Putin's great wealth, most of it was held in trust by probably a small group of about 50 oligarchs. So, you know, freezing their wealth and further releasing that for the rebuilding of Ukraine, which, by the way, has been put at as high as $1 trillion to date, would be a very, very good start. So I can only say, yes, we've heard some very promising noises from the international community and key figures in the American administration. I can only hope that we are determined on this and that we will do this, because at the end of the day, remember, Putin is a criminal. He cares only about himself and his own wealth and his own position, as do those around him. So I go back to what Bill Browder said almost 18 months ago, to follow the money, and that was the way to get to him. And, you know, I'm not sure that we have done that significantly enough as yet.
Well, but Mr. Blinken was here. He was meeting our minister, and it was said that all the money that has been frozen now will go to Ukraine. Isn't that the start finally of the process? Or you have your shades of the doubts? Or you should we be expecting this money to be released to Ukraine very soon, do you think?
If Anthony Blinken has said that, and I know he has, by the way, and he is somebody that I would regard very, very highly as a diplomat of the highest standard and integrity, I think it's a really, really strong signal. I think it is very good news. But, you know, I was thinking, Henry, just before I came on to speak to you, I was reviewing some interviews. I've been doing interviews since the middle of January in 2022, over a month before the full-time invasion. And I had a saying that what we needed to do was to arm Ukraine to the teeth and sanction Russia back to the Stone Age. Now, while we have given Ukraine a huge amount of support in terms of armaments, it has been incremental. It is still not enough. We know the Ukrainians have been prosecuting a very, very difficult counteroffensive without the air superiority that one would expect them to need, and against very, very well prepared, deep Russian defenses and very deep minefields. Now, we do know that counteroffensive is making progress. It is going forward. And we know that probably in the last 6 to 8 weeks, Ukraine has regained more land than Russia captured in the previous year before that. And I think people in the international community need to give Ukraine more credit for what they are doing. Ukraine, obviously, also, and many of their people, including General Zaluzny, has said one of the reasons they will progress slowly is to save and preserve as many Ukrainian lives as possible. They are progressing with great care, and they're having to do this because they don't have the air cover. They don't have the amount of long-range artillery that they have been begging for. I believe the Germans have still not signed off on Taurus, which is a
but really are limited in time at the moment.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for your detailed answers and for your expertise, and again for your time. And I hope to see you soon with us again, Mr. Smith.
Henry, it's always a pleasure to join you. I'm here for you anytime I can help.
Thank you very much. Hope to see you soon. What is this happening in Kremlin? I mean, the ill fetish of the Kremlin to kill and terrorize is not already an open question, rather closed answer. The entire man-eating regime, the machine, feeds the Russians to themselves. All those who are actively involved in voting and organizing elections, and not only in the territory of Mordor, but also on Ukrainian territories, are criminals. Well, as simple as that. They, of course, afterwards might say that X people have been involved in all this, not them. However, whatever. Sometimes you probably just can't disagree with some classics, right?
A good Russian is a dead Russian.
In Moscow, no matter how they don't believe themselves, they still continue to call the occupied territories of Ukraine theirs. And the local population are all of a sudden Russian citizens. It is a massive brainwashing machine working there. The first thing is to cut off all the alternative media sources. Well, of course, who needs truth in a failing state of lies, right? As soon as the Russian military appears, Ukrainian television, radio, the internet, and very often even the mobile communications just disappear. Everything is Russian now. The land, the language, the people, the air, water, and of course, TV. That shows the people of Mariupol rejoicing for some reason near new missile incoming craters. At the same time, the Russian TV somehow forgets to mention that it was the Russian army who has literally wiped Mariupol off the face of this earth. Occupied cities are littered with billboards and posters glorifying the Russian army and the united people. New Russian version of history and reality is taught in Ukrainian schools that literally stand on the occupied by Russia Ukrainian land. Russia attempts to rewrite history, no less. In a new Russian version of it, a lot of attention paid to the large-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine that Vladimir Putin urges us to call a special military operation. In turn, Ukraine is referred to as the Nazi regime, and that the special military operations has been the direct result of this. Well, Russian propaganda tries to stage the impression of the flourishing life of recovering and thriving people on the land has burnt and occupied, while nothing but the usual Russian reality reigns there: chaos, poverty, torture, illegal persecution, and degradation. These shots demonstrate the true essence of the Russian Federation. This is a restored new building in Mariupol, a single one against the background of the burnt and devastated city. This is a clear and outrageous example of Russians trying to cancel the Ukrainian identity. This is not the first time that the aggressor country of Russia has occupied the lands and held illegal elections there, so for the Kremlin to have a grip. For example, during the military conflict, or shall I say war, between Russia and Georgia. In 2008, Russia held elections in the regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Both of these regions declared independence from Georgia after the elections, and Russia recognized their independence, which further, of course, worsened relations between Russia and Georgia and triggered an international conflict. Many countries and international organizations continue to support the territorial integrity of Georgia and just do not recognize the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Russia also had its significant influence on the situation in Transnistria. I mean, the elections held on the territory. The Russian Federation provides political and military support to the region, and its troops were located on the territory of Transnistria and continued to be there long after the end of the conflict in 1992. Due to the fact that Transnistria is under this quite significant influence of Russia, many countries and international organizations just do not recognize the legitimacy of the elections held there. Following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, Russia held elections in occupied Crimea. This show took place under, of course, full control of the Kremlin and, of course, without any participation of a single internationally recognized observer. Many countries and international organizations do not recognize these elections as legitimate again. In 2014, after the Russian occupation of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, elections were held in these territories just as well, and the scenario was absolutely the same. The representatives of the so-called newborn republics were elected. These elections were also not recognized by Ukraine and the majority of the countries of the world. And I mean, it is quite impossible to accept an election as legitimate while the territory where elections are taking place is annexed by the brutal invader who initiates elections, right? Let's discuss this with someone who probably knows the answer to this very hard question. Let's discuss it with Glen Grant. Hello, dear sir. We're glad to say our hellos to you today.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Glen Grant is a retired British Army Lieutenant Colonel. So good afternoon again. And my first question is, Russia is not doing this for the first time. I mean, it arranges illegitimate elections, occupies, annexes and kills. The way to hold Russia within its borders is only one, a proper and mighty army. Do you agree to this?
I don't agree that you have to stretch yourself to the point of stupidity by having more soldiers than you can afford to equip. Because if you do that, then you end up with lots and lots of people who are not really capable of actually fighting properly. So I think that one has to look at this in a financial terms and say that, you know, the limit and the size of the army is what you can have, that you can afford to give them proper clothing, proper protection, weapons, ammunition, and everything else. And it strikes me at the moment that Ukraine is somewhere around about the right balance, and that if it actually goes much larger, it'll simply run out of money. And then you end up with just soldiers dying because they can't actually fight properly.
Is why the world did not foresee that of that time, the Russian threat, the aggression of Russia in Georgia in 2008. Is it just convenient to be blind for the international community, or maybe some other reason?
That's a stinking question, because I think you probably even have to go back further to Chechnya, and actually say, why did we not realize, you know, what was going on in Chechnya was actually,
Indeed,
you know, the first steps of Putin trying to sort himself out. At 2008, I mean, I think people were just shocked. And of course, we really in the West were just not ready for the sheer quality of the strategic communication that came out of Russia, and the way that it actually made Saakashvili look like a fool or dangerous or all sorts of things, when in fact all he was doing was trying to protect his own country. And we weren't ready for that. And I think that nobody was ready for a nation-on-nation war, because we haven't had one really since Second World War. Okay, sorry, Korea. But people just weren't ready for it. So mentally, whether you count the European Union just wanted peace at all costs. I mean, and that's the way they've been thinking. You know, we've had all this peace now, we don't want to lose it. I think Americans just weren't engaged properly, mentally. Too much internal engagement, too much worrying about their own lives in America, and not enough to realize that what was going on over there was going to affect them severely a few years later on, which of course it has.
Well, I mean, since Russia is doing that all of the time, I mean, annexing and killing, again, my question is, as an international community, as a collective West, do we have any tool and instrument to stop that, to react that? Maybe better communication between countries, or what do you think? How can we manage this issue?
That, again, is another good question. I mean, NATO has proven to be not the tool, because NATO is a defensive tool. And so, you know, NATO has been okay for defending us, but it's not been okay for facing Russia, because it's not designed for that. It doesn't have either the organization for it, and it doesn't have the whole sort of reason for existence for going and fighting Russia. Its only reason is, you know, you fight us and we'll fight back, not you're fighting other people and we're going to come and fight you. So NATO's not the tool. I mean, perhaps we need actually, you know, what we had for the first Gulf War, which was, you know, coalition of the willing, of those people who are actually, those countries that are actually brave enough and sharp enough to actually to go and do the business and stand alongside Ukraine in the battlefield. But hey, there are very few Western countries that are actually strong enough to do that at the moment. They may be forced to, mind, by Russia, but at the moment they're not going to volunteer for the for the hangman, as you would say.
So there is no answer to my question, isn't it?
Well, really, I mean, you made a good point about, communication, and I think that communication is vital. I mean, we've always had, the United Nations for communication. Effectively, that was supposed to be the tool for peace,
right?
But it hasn't worked. I mean, it's actually turned out to be the reverse.
Well,
it's a tool for.
Pardon, mate. Yeah.
No. I mean, it's become a tool.
Right. Well, at least now we see the problem. At least we see the directions we all have to move. Maybe.
I think you're right there. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We've now seen the problem. And I mean, actually, I read someone who said, I wanted to join the United Nations. Then after the war started, I definitely didn't want to join the United Nations. But now I want to join the United Nations to go and sort it out. By goodness, does it need sorting out? It's terrible. And communication. Well, we have the the G7, which is probably the strongest that we're going to get towards a coalition of the willing, because at least it doesn't contain Russia. But when you go to the G20, you've got a lot of people there who are supporting Russia. That doesn't make the G20 a useful tool. Well, so perhaps we need a new tool.
All right. Well, Russia supporters in G20. You see, why?
What do you mean by why?
Why they are supporting Russia? Is there purely financial? Political, or they do they really believe?
No, I don't think it is financial. I think most of it is against US. It's not financial. It's against, it's this, we hate US and we hate everything that US does. And let's be blunt about it. People hate the US because it's successful. It makes money, it does well. And if it didn't do well, why are there tens and tens of thousands of people trying to get in there illegally every day, including Russians, including people, Indians, all these other countries that face up against America and don't want the great America? Their best people are upping and going and working in Silicon Valley and other places, even working as waiters and maids, because they still believe in the American dream, which their own country doesn't.
Russia tried to provoke Romania, Poland, and the Baltic states. What if the Kremlin would dare to provoke the United Kingdom? Say a Russian fighter jet just trespasses British airspace and launches a missile, and they say the usual Russian apology that it was not us. What do you think the reaction could have been?
I think of all the countries in the world, I think Britain would go to war. I don't think that there's any doubt in my mind that they would take, if it was seen as being a deliberate act, I think now they would have to actually to do that, because Parliament would not let a Prime Minister through. I mean, it got extremely close in discussion in UK after the Skripal murders and things like this. But I think that, a missile would be one step too far. I wouldn't necessarily say the same would happen about other countries in Europe, though.
Obviously.
But I think UK has a history of trying to do the right thing, because we don't always get it right, never have done. But at least we try to do the right thing.
What do you mean by that? Well,
I mean, as a country, as a character, we support the underdog. We always have done. We do try and live up to the values that we've the historic values that we've claimed as a country. And as I said, we don't always get that right. I mean, we did some awful things in Kenya, for example, when we were there, and we've done awful things in India and Egypt and places at times. But those were the signs of the times. When you look back on them, they're awful. At the time, they were what people thought needed to be done. But at least we've tried to do these things. So I think that, again, Britain would try to do it. And that's why you've seen, from the beginning of this war, why you've seen Boris, first of all, being so active, and then the sadly leaving defence minister active. And I think you're going to continue to see UK being active. But I don't think Russia should mess with UK.
I hope Russia will. And I hope that will be the end.
Maybe that's another way of looking at it, yes.
Exactly. Yeah. My next question, and the last question for today. Let's try to get in the ill hand of Vladimir Putin. What do you think he's hoping for at the moment? not trying even to stop all this mess, trying to provoke NATO countries, not UK, but Poland and Romania and Baltic states. Why? Do you believe he has a goal, any strategic goal for all that?
Well, I think he probably does have a strategic goal, but I mean, something that's been sort of bothering me is actually, what does he know? You know, I don't think he's the all-knowing, all-seeing head of this war that we actually think he is, or that people try to make him out as being. I think that he knows a lot less about what's going on than we think. I also don't think he understands a lot of things. I mean, I think his understanding of the world is neatly summed up by his 3 days to Kiev idea, that, you know, he thought that Ukraine will give up and everybody loves him because they want to be part of Russia. And I think he thinks this is, you know, this is how his brain thinks, that NATO and everybody is ganging up against Russia. And I've heard this from Russians several times in the past. You know, they've said, well, what do you think about what Russia's doing at the moment? I said, well, I don't. I've not even thought about it at all.
Well,
go back 7, 10 years.
Russia doesn't know it
because
too,
it doesn't
so
feature.
okay.
It doesn't feature. And if you ask 10 years ago, you ask your average American about Russia, and you know, and ask them to draw it on the map, well, then you'd get some interesting results, because most couldn't, and even those who could don't think about Russia from one day to the next. And actually, I think that is part of Putin's drive, that he wants everybody to think about Russia from one day to the next. He wants us all to think about, you know, what's going on. But he's got to keep his audience at home thinking he's still the great Putin. And therefore, I think that the majority of things that you see that are happening are actually happening for the home consumption, not for the not for the West. No, does he need NATO to fight him? Probably, so that he can stay there.
Absolutely.
Because he's running out of other options and explanations. You know, there's not many things left he can actually say, is there? Right. Other than we're fighting the world for the greatness, who are trying to take over Russia, etc.
The next step is take it to the moon, I believe. Well, let's get out of Vladimir Putin's head and get into the minds of millions and millions of Russians. If they would have a choice, like, this is the end of Mother Russia as they know it, or this is another Tsar upcoming. No federal country anymore, or another Tsar. I mean, the total uncertainty, uncertain future. What do you think Russians will choose?
Tsar. 97, 98% Azar, because that's the only thing they know. It's the only form of leadership they know and understand. And they think it's right that you should have someone who knows all these things and does all these things. You don't see any signs of anybody trying to trash Putin's palaces, do you?
No.
There's your answer. Another Tsar. In our wonderful palaces that we have helped our Tsar build.
That's indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Grant, for your time and for your expertise and for your lovely answers. It was a pleasure meeting you and discussing things with you. Hope someday you can join us for another conversation.
I would love to. Thank you very much. Good questions. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. And glory to our heroes, too.
Glory to our heroes. There was a lovely conversation with Glen Grant, ex-British officer, Lieutenant Colonel, just by the way. And my new question is to artificial intelligence. Hopefully he would answer it. These days, new challenges are out there globally. A lot depends on me, on us as a journalist community who objectively covers their stories or not. Let me ask my virtual neuro assistant. What role does media censorship and propaganda play in illegal elections?
In the digital age, social media plays a crucial role. Media censorship involves restricting or controlling the flow of information. In illegal elections, this can be used to suppress dissenting voices, limit access to opposition candidates, and manipulate public perception in favor of those organizing the illegal election. Propaganda aims to shape public opinion through biased or misleading information.
And for now, I must say my goodbyes to you. It was my show, Talk for More. If you liked the episode, check the like button, please. If you don't like it for some reason, write in comments why. And ring the bell, sign to be the first to see the latest information. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the Gates platform on YouTube and all across the social universe. See you soon.